Welcome to Speedy Walkthroughs, where we show just the important stuff to beating the game. For first time viewers, this will look different to a normal walkthrough. It'll show just the essentials, so you don't need to spend a long time watching this video. Today we're playing Sonic Origins Mission Mode, and this is also in Sonic Origins Plus. So this is a set of missions that you can do in the 4 Sonic games, and you want 100% complete all the missions. We're also going to be S-ranking the missions, which means doing them under the target time limit. So I'll talk through all the strategies that I use to get S rank on each of these missions, and then hopefully you should be able to do the same with a bit of practice. If you end up finding this video useful, then please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps out a lot, and I hope to continue making these videos in the future. So you're going to start with not many missions unlocked, but we'll start off with Caterpillar Swarm, which is the first one of the Sonic the Hedgehog missions. Let's have a look. So you're going to kill 5 caterpillars here. And you really just want to jump on their heads to make it through. There we go. And with these early missions, you got a bit of time up your sleeve to S-rank it still, so even though I've made quite a few mistakes here, it should still be okay realistically. And there we go. Next one we got is Twinkle Toes. This one can take quite a while to do. Basically, if you just get up on the same platform cycle that I get here, you should be able to make it. Alright, there we go, making it through. And then you want to do a really big run to the left here and make this next cycle. And then jump up there. Should be able to S-rank it. Remember, you do have the drop dash if you need to. Next time we got is Ring Rush coming up here. This one can be a bit tricky. So I like to just run across the spikes here and get all these rings. Your goal is to get 100 rings by the time you get to the end. So there's actually a lot more than 100 rings in this sort of level section here. So you don't have to try that hard to make sure you get all 100. My main priority would be to get the invincibility if you can, because the invincibility will help you get all those rings. And not lose any rings. Next one is Ring Challenge 50 in Labyrinth Zone. So here you have the same idea, you just have to be really careful that you don't accidentally lose your rings. So you can see there's rings to the left there, but you've got to be quite careful that you don't hit that spike ball when you're trying to get those rings. And then there's some rings up here. That should be enough for us to finish this one off. Next one we got here is Sonic Spin Dash Attack. Now there's a little trick for this one. If you're rolling, that also counts. So you can roll and get these enemies, that's fine. Also, if you spin dash and then jump out of your spin dash, the jump that you have after your spin dash works as well. So you can sort of see me, I'm going to land here and roll down, and that'll still count. You can watch the counter on the top right, and then that sort of indicates how well you're doing. But yeah, if you're ever having trouble with these spin dash challenges, spin dash and then just jump out, and then jump on the enemies normally, and it still counts. So it's pretty easy to cheese this one. The hard thing about this one is not necessarily getting the 10 enemies, it's actually getting to the goal in time. But we'll see pretty soon that we'll be able to get there. Next one we got is Aerial Attack here, and this is with Knuckles. You have to sort of glide with Knuckles and get these bat enemies. It can be a little bit tricky to get the height, so you sort of want this sort of height there. And then there are some bat enemies down a bit lower, so try not to just go to the right real quick at the start. Try and manage your height and get all the bat enemies killed. You can also kill the crab enemies, but in my experience they're not super worth it. There's a couple more bats down here which should help us get towards 15. And one more. Next one we have is Mercy, and that involves not touching any enemies. So this one's quite simple to do because the enemies aren't super in your way, but just be aware if you do touch them you will fail the challenge, so just be careful around that. That bit there is probably the hardest bit, but with a cheeky jump over you'll be fine. Next one we have here is Neutron Swarm. You have to really slow down and make sure you're killing these. If you just blast through towards the end, you'll have gotten to the end and not killed enough. Especially the ones that sort of spawn in like this. You want to let them fully spawn in and then kill them. But the funny thing is, once you slow down to try and get 10, you often end up getting way more than 10. It's a bit weird. Alright, next thing we've got here is 0 ring challenge. Basically, you just can't take any damage. First bit is this spike ball here. You got to watch out for that. And then you got this. Be careful of this spike ball. But then after that, it's fairly safe. You can usually zoom through these enemies. You'll be okay. Next one we have is a swing in good time. Now you're supposed to use the platforms to get across these gaps, but it's kind of weird because if you fall down, you just land on ground anyway. So it's a little bit weird that it's not like required to use the platforms. Next one we have is Thorny Challenge. You just got to avoid dying here. So it seems like it's going to be real hard, but you know, since you can just collect the rings that you drop anyway, it's not too bad actually. There we go. Next one is Duck and Dive. My strategy for this one is to sort of get tails underneath the blocks flying. It's a little bit weird to describe, but it does work really well once you got it. You can also just damage boost and like zoom across everything. You'll see here that I got tails sort of underneath and he's flying like real well through everything. Just be sure when you're flying that you do stop and take breaks, because otherwise stuff like that will happen. Next one here is Eggman Fancy Footwork. A lot of people consider this one of the hardest challenges in the game. So my strategy for this one here is to get sort of into the middle section and just keep using that middle one to bounce and get him. You'll only hit like 49 seconds, so you'll just barely S-rank it if you use this strategy, but it's enough to S-rank it and it's fairly safe. You can see that as I'm sort of bouncing, he's laying more mines, so that's really helpful. You really want every time that he goes past for him to lay a mine, otherwise it won't be quick enough to kill him. I'm not 100% sure how it determines whether he's going to lay a mine or not, but it seems that if you're kind of not on the platform, he tends to lay one, so that's the strategy I'm using there. Trying to bounce up as he would normally be laying that mine. You'll see here I only just barely S-rank it, but it is enough to S-rank it, which is good. Next one is 0 Ring Challenge Part 2, and this one takes quite a bit of practice. It can be pretty tense. Basically here you want to jump up. You'll hear me drop dash over these spikes. And that's just to get through a little bit safer. You want to go left off this spring. And then sort of spin dash back through. Very tricky mission, that one. Next one here is the 1 Ring Challenge. So it says that you can't lose your ring, but you actually can lose it as long as you pick it up again. I like to hit this cycle with these little spiky bits here and then make it through. So you're going to have to basically accept you'll lose this ring occasionally and then just damage boost through all the enemies. That's the general strategy you want to use. Can also be quite scary on air. You'll see that I barely just make it out here with enough air. But realistically, if you're running out of air, you're probably not going fast enough to S-rank it anyway, so you want to be speedy through that. Next one is Extreme Sonic Spin Dash Attack. And you can use that strategy that I talked about before where you jump out of a spin dash and it still counts as killing the enemies. You have to be very careful of these enemies because they can shoot you as you're trying to spin dash them. But if you follow the same path that I took here, you should be able to get through this fairly successfully. It can take you a lot of goes, but basically that way you can hit 16 out of 15 and make your way towards that S rank. Next one is Extreme Aerial Attack. Now you're going to beat these enemies on the top, then come down and beat these enemies. You have to beat 20 in total. There are 20 on the map, but it's really difficult to get the last few. So I'm going to beat this many enemies here, and then go to the right a little bit and beat these few. But then I'm actually going to respawn enemies up the top. So for whatever reason, once you've killed enough, they do respawn there. And you can use that to get your 20th enemy there, or maybe a few towards the very end. Next one here is Extreme Duck and Dive. Now you want to watch where I'm flying and take very careful note of where I land after flying. So you land on this one here. And then you're going to land on this one here, but it pulls away very quickly. You then come up here, but you got to be real careful of this little exploding guy. You then don't fly straight up because those zappers will get you. And you've got to watch out for this exploding guy. And the same one with this exploding guy. Probably best to sit under that one, and then you make your way across. The time limit's not a huge issue here, but it's very easy to die on this one. And that Sonic 1 mission's complete. We'll move on to Sonic CD now. Alright, so if you scroll across with RT, you'll get to Sonic CD, and the first one is Time Travel 101. So to travel to the future and the past, you basically have to hit the sign and then gain a lot of speed. So that's what we're going to do here. And then here, we can travel to the future and essentially just get between these two springs. Use those springs to let us travel to the future. So there is a little bit of an exploit in Sonic Origins where you can just drop dash and keep going back and forth to travel between the future and past. So that's good to keep in mind if you want to be doing this. Next one we have is Small Stuff, and that's completing the stage as Mini Sonic. This one's quite long, so I will speed it up. Now this bit here is kind of tricky. You do have to get underneath where this dude is picking you up and throwing you away. So we'll get into that little gap there and then just let it walk past. And there we go. Next one we have is True Trajectory. Now this one you can sort of grab the rings as you're falling down there. And you can sort of bounce up and down with these rings. Once you got 50 rings, feel free to make your way to the end. There you go. Next one here is this timed battle. You got to kill 10 of these enemies. It can be pretty difficult to find all 10, but just follow the same path that I'm doing here. You want to make sure none of them sort of like run away as you're beating them, because that will impact on whether you can get all 10. Next one is Twinkle Toes again. You want to ride these platforms and get the rings as you go. You'll need at least 15 rings, but then you do also need to get to the end of the section. You'll find there's actually quite a lot of rings on this path, so you don't have to stop and try and get every single ring. Just try and get as many as you can. Next one here is Fast Foes. Basically, you got to get through this level while the enemies are just zooming like this. It can be pretty tricky, but just follow the same path that I'm doing and you should be right. Next one here is Mercy. Again, you got to try and not touch any enemies as you're going through. And there we go. Next one here is Timely Technique. So notice here with the timer, every time you hit an enemy, the timer goes back up to 10 seconds. And that's part of the gimmick of this mission. So you've only got 10 seconds to actually reach the goal, but you can keep resetting that back up to 10 by killing enemies. So you've sort of got to kill an enemy every 10 seconds to make it through. Next one is Take to the Air, where you basically just have to fly through and get rings. In this one, rings are fairly scarce, so make sure you are stopping and grabbing a bunch. Next one is Reverse Time Traveler Redux, and this one is actually pretty tricky. So you have to time travel, so you got to go to the future and the past. You want to follow pretty much the same future past travels that I'm doing in this video here. So we're going to hit the past time post there and try and build up enough speed that we can do that. Unfortunately there I had lost the speed, but there's this little section here where you can build up a lot of speed real quick. There's this spring system that if you basically just hold down on the D-pad, you'll keep zooming through and spring through everything. And once you've done that, you'll find there's actually another past symbol there, so you can do the same thing to travel back into the past again. So if you can get yourself into this little area with these two springs, you should be fine with this challenge here. Next one here is Ring Challenge 100, where you got to get 100 rings in this little bit of the level here. The rings are fairly bountiful. You don't have to worry about slowing down and getting every single one. Just try and get as many as you can. And remember that you can see yourself in these speedway bits just by holding left and right as you spring back up into them. Next one here is the time battle. You got to kill 30 of these enemies here. I'm going to speed this up because it is quite a long one. Now there are only 30 enemies in this map, so you do have to get every single one. So make sure as you're going through each area, you're sort of sweeping it clean and definitely getting all those enemies in there. I find it best to work bottom to top in general. In this one I'm kind of working in a little circle around to make sure I get every single one. The S-rank time here is extremely generous, so just focus on killing the enemies, don't worry about going too fast really. Now this one here is Eggman Speed Up. This one took me a long time to figure out actually. So Eggman will come in and you have barely any time to actually beat him. So you wait till he gets roughly to this point. And then when he charges up, you can do some damage and then get a couple bounces on the top and make it through. It can be quite tense because you'll see when you're playing this, the timer keeps going, but it actually stops once you beat Eggman in this mission. So you only have to beat him in under 15 seconds. Alright, this one here is Tough Bluff. You just have to make it to the goal, really. So try and take your time making sure you're landing on these platforms when they're actually available to land on. This next one is Gotta Go Fast, where everything's moving really fast. You got to beat the level. General strategy here is just to stay down, because you have to bounce under things to get through. This one I found not too bad to actually beat. I don't know if I was just lucky or not, but it seemed fairly straightforward. You just go right and keep down. The time limit is very generous for an S rank as well. Alright, this next one here is Extreme Gotta Go Fast. Now this is probably the hardest mission in the game. You want to go up here, and then drop down as this guy's moving to the right, and then do some cheeky bounce on there. Slow down once you get in, because there's another one here, and then spin dash under him. Very, very difficult mission. This one here is Extreme Take to the Air. You've just got to get a bunch of rings with tails. So follow the same ring and path that I'm getting, and you should be fine. Just make sure you're taking those opportunities to take a rest from flying if you need to, because tails only fly for a certain amount of time. Alright, now that Sonic CD is done, we're moving on to Sonic 2, and we have the Stinger Swarm mission. So if you just zoom to the end, you won't be able to kill all 5, so make sure that you slow down and get these ones that I'm getting. Most of them are fairly in your way, but the S rank time is pretty tight, so just be aware of that. Once you've beaten these 5, you should be able to go to the end goal, just in time for an S rank. Next one here is Bounce House, where you got to bounce up towards the goal here. It can be pretty tricky, but you basically just want to gain height. So remember that sometimes holding the jump button can help you gain height, particularly off those yellow bumpers. And here when you're on the rings, you basically want to just get central, but slightly off to one side. That's the way you get the most height, by being really close to the center there. Next one we got here is Seesaw Jump. So this one, you want to keep an eye out for where you can skip seesaws if possible. For example, this bit here, you can skip seesaws by just doing that jump. And here I've skipped another seesaw there. If you want to get a high bounce, you want to go roughly in the middle of the seesaw. Sort of like there would get you a fairly high bounce. And your bounces will get higher as you do more and more of the bounces itself. Now here you can bounce up off this seesaw, which could work, but what's probably a better strategy is to use that red spring that you just saw there. So rather than bouncing off the seesaw, you could fall down onto this red spring and just use that to get up. It's a bit more realistic than trying to manage your height carefully. Then we got a couple more seesaws to do, and we should be able to S rank this still. Just remember to keep in mind, you don't always have to seesaw, sometimes you can just make the jumps across. Next one we got here is Pinball Pro. There's a little strategy for getting a whole bunch of points here. You can basically just get on this flipper and just keep doing that. You'll get 5,000 like super quickly. And there we go. And we should be able to get to the goal there just in time for that S rank. Next one we got is Bullet Hail, and the idea behind this one is you've got to pretty much keep all of your rings and not lose any. The more rings you get, the closer you get to the S rank. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing, just dodging enemies and making sure we keep all of our rings here. It's best to kill them as soon as possible, or in cases like this, get in positions where you know they're definitely not going to hit you. If you can do that successfully, then you'll make it through and get that S rank. You pretty much need all your rings to S rank it, so if you do lose any rings, you pretty much want to restart that mission right away. Next time we're doing is Supersonic Finish, and this one's actually pretty fun. Essentially, it's not a time issue, it's more of a ring issue that you're trying to maximize for. So you'll see that ring counter is determining your S rank, so you want to do it quickly so that you haven't lost rings, but you also want to slow down and grab all the rings that you can to Supersonic. You want to do little cheeky things here, like I opened the platform, but I didn't actually need to in that situation, because Supersonic can make all these crazy jumps that normal Sonic can't make. If you do hit that required ring threshold, you will get the S rank. There we go. Next one here is Mercy, and this is in Oil Ocean Zone. This one actually is pretty tricky. So again, you have to not hit any enemies, and some of the enemies are really in your way and really difficult to avoid. So we're going to come up there, and then we're going to drop dash and get over these enemies. So you want a lot of speed to make it across that, to get past those enemies. Next one here is Slippery Swim, so you want to sort of get in the oil and kill 10 of these enemies here. So I wouldn't recommend going up over the oil at all, you basically just want to stay in there killing these enemies as you go. Every time there's a ring, there's usually an enemy in it and underneath, so you want to use those to indicate where the enemies are going to be. Towards the end here, there's a whole bunch of them, so you can use that opportunity to sort of get in there and kill a whole bunch. Next one we got here is Tails in Aquatic Ruin, and essentially what you need to do is get through just in under the time limit there. So it can be pretty tricky because of these spike balls, but if you know what you're doing, you can sort of get around them and predict where they're going to be. The hardest part is coming up here where you sort of got to fly up while one of them's swinging. Make sure as well that you don't run out of air. It can be very easy to do that. That you're slowing down and getting bubbles is a good idea, and you do have a bit of leeway in the S rank time. So here's the hard bit that I was talking about before. You want to wait till it swings like that and then go up the right column. That's going to be able to get you through there. Next one here is quick step. So the trickiest part of this mission is this section here where you have to really intentionally slow down and wait for these platforms to come up. So here I'm going to wait a little bit for those to come up and then make our way through. This mission is not too bad once you're patient with it, but the thing that can be tricky is getting through the mission without getting impatient and trying to rush it. Next one here is animal rescue, where you sort of have to open these capsules. And now that we've got all 5 there, we can actually just go and finish off the level. So there is like a little exit signpost that you have to get to at the end. There we go. This one here is Tornado Flyby, and it's similar to that last mission we had where you got to get to the end and keep all your rings. Very, very tricky. Now the strategy here is you've got these starfish enemies. Now normally in the base game of Sonic 2 you wouldn't really be able to kill those because they're in the wall. But here you can actually jump and kill them before they explode. So that's really important to keep in mind. You do want to kill those starfish enemies before they hurt you, and then just gradually jump around everything. You want to be really aware of the starfish, and if you do get caught, remember they spit out in a pentagonal shape. They're little starfish spiky things, so you want to avoid those if possible. You'll need pretty much all your rings at the end here, so make sure that if you lose any, you do restart the mission. This one here is Eggman Blue Beam. And it's basically just this boss, but Eggman's moving that little bit faster, so you can't cheese the boss by just jumping on his head 8 times before he shoots. There we go, that's the boss beaten, and then you should be able to S rank it from here. Next one here is Bodyguard, so we're going to make our way through. Just be really careful that you're avoiding all the enemies where possible, and just make your way gradually up. This one shouldn't be too tricky if you're patient with it. This one here is the Tough Get Going, and it can be a pretty tricky mission if you're not used to what to do with it. You do want to get you 20 rings, and there are a lot more than 20 rings, but because there's so many damage sources, you're going to lose them in all likeliness. So you want to wait towards the end here. There's these 3 things. You want to jump and glide onto the wall before they can shoot. So just like that, glide up. You'll always pretty much lose your rings when you try and do this little bit. So you want to be really careful towards that end section. This one is Extreme Supersonic Finish. So similar to the last Supersonic one, you want to keep as many rings as you can towards the end. So I'm going to take the top path here and go up through, grab all the rings that I can. And then if you can finish with that 15 rings, you will S rank it. This one is Extreme Paddle Challenge. So you want to beat it in under a minute, and it is pretty tricky because you're underwater. Just remember the main thing is to keep landing and make sure you're refreshing Tails' flight, as well as making sure you grab air whenever you can. This one is extreme, the tough get going. Pretty much you want those 50 rings, so if you get hit, you'll want to restart the level here. Pretty tricky mission, this one. And getting those last few rings, we're just going to go through to the end section now, which is just across there. Alright, that's Sonic 2 missions done, so we're going to move on to Sonic 3 and Knuckles missions now, the last game. So on this one here, you just want to kill 10 bats to make it to the end. Next one we got here is Sandy Swim, so you're just going to get those rings. Next one here is Knuckles Climbing Challenge. So pretty much the way the challenge is set up, you can just glide across wherever you need to. It's pretty clear where you do need to glide because the path is traced out by like rings or blocks or whatever. Next one we got here is Ring Vacuum. This one's actually kind of fun because it relies on the lightning shield to vacuum up these rings from out of bounds. Pretty much just follow the path and go close to any rings you can get to, particularly these ones up here would be easy to miss. You got a bit of time up your sleeve, so just take your time making sure you get all the rings that you can. This one here is Animal Rescue. Make sure that you do hit all these little capsules as they're coming down, and they follow a pretty predictable pattern. It just goes like left, middle, right every time. So just keep an eye on where they're coming down, and you're not trying to gain a whole bunch of height really quickly. What you're trying to do is break the capsules really quickly, so keep that in mind as you're breaking them. Next one here is Tails Balloon Burst. Just remember that if you're flying, when you hit a balloon, you're going to go up really, really high. So make sure that you're just conscious of where you're flying and where you're not flying as you're breaking these. It is not a bad strategy just to like get into flying and keep bursting up to the roof and then coming back down, because you'll be pretty much guaranteed to hit the next balloon, whatever it is. Next one is Mercy in Launch Base. Again, just be sure that you're not hitting any enemies here. That's the goal of this mission. There actually aren't too many enemies around, so it's not too difficult to avoid hitting them. Next one is Ring Vacuum here. You have to pick whatever shield you think is going to be appropriate for whatever you're doing at the time. So we're about to go into water, so water shield is going to be the first one we use here. It can be a pretty frustrating challenge, this one, in all honesty. Now with the abilities with each shield, just remember the water shield does have this lovely bounce with it, which can help you gain a lot of height. Fire shield has the extra double jump, which sort of pushes you left or right really quickly. And then the thunder shield has the double jump, where you can just gain a bunch of extra height. So I'll slot to thunder here. Next one we have is the conveyor belt challenge. The hard part here is not getting hit by enemies rather than actually getting enough rings in the first place. So you want to be really conscious of where the enemies are and focus on making sure you're avoiding those as your first priority and then grabbing rings as your second priority. Alright, next we got Fireball Dash, and you actually have to kill enemies by doing that double jump fireball thing through the enemies. So just be conscious that you're doing that to kill the enemies here, and then you should be fine. They normally come in pairs like that, so they're pretty straightforward to get 5 of each. And you want to be conscious that these little rooster enemies will blow you to the left and right, so be careful of that. Alright, next one we got is Time Battle Rhino Bot. In this one you have to kill all 15 of the rhinos, and it's actually pretty tricky to find where they all are. So keep an eye on where I'm finding them, and then you should be able to find them in the same spots for yourself. In terms of the S rank time, it's pretty easy to get that one, given it's a fairly generous window, but the hard part is finding all those rhinos. Next one we got here is the Water Shield Challenge. So if you follow pretty much what I'm doing here, you should be right. Make sure you're using that bounce from the Water Shield to make your way through. The description says something about not losing the Water Shield, but as far as I know, it doesn't really matter if you lose it or not. So make our way down and left, and then spin dash up here. This one's actually really fun once you get used to it. It's got some pretty fluid movement in it, no pun intended.